One of the big questions of our current time is how the heck are you supposed to know if the image you're seeing, or the article you're reading, or even the project you just paid someone a lot of money to work on was completed in whole or in part by some artificial intelligence tool like ChatGPT. So in this video, we're going to look at AI fingerprinting, learn about the various techniques and innovations that might help us to track what's created with AI, and how this might apply to tools we use right now like ChatGPT, Midjourney, or Bing Chat, and new ones coming around the corner like Microsoft 365 Copilot. But first, let's take a minute to consider why this is an important issue. AI is one of the most promising technologies since probably the creation of the World Wide Web to be the next advance that radically changes how we work, just as the steam engine, electricity, the computer, and the internet have done in the past. But whereas those developments through history have served almost solely to amplify the impact or efficacy of human work, AI is a little different. Using a computer, a human can produce the calculations for finance reports more accurately, but they're still responsible for the numbers. Or using the internet, they could research a paper quicker, but they're still responsible for distilling that information into the final product. With AI, you have a situation where the tool can now potentially get to the output without the need for the human steps or inputs in between. And this is called some alarm. Last week I read this Wired article by Alistair Kroll that got me really thinking about this issue and inspired me to make this video. A link is below and I encourage you to read it. But it looks at the issue of how we might apply the concept of watermarking to AI-generated output in order to track where it's used. If you're enjoying this content, please do me the favour of hitting the like button below, and if you'd like to see more of this, please subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you'll know the next time I release a video. Also, if this content would be useful to people in your network, please consider sharing it there. Thanks. There is perhaps no place where this concern is more pronounced than in education. Imagine if in your days at college there was a tool that could write your essays for you. Might you have been tempted? Might this have seemed less egregiously cheating than having another human write it for you? And frankly, we just need to consider the history of the calculator. When I was in school, I was told we shouldn't use one as you won't always have one with you. But then came the iPhone. So see how that turned out, Mr. Griffiths. A couple of weeks ago, the New York Times podcast, The Daily, covered this issue in detail from both the student and professorial perspective. What was interesting was the stark line that seemed to exist between both camps. But there is more nuance in academia generally, as can be evidenced by this Q&A published by the University of Cambridge. However, outside of education, in all walks of life, this can have an impact. Do you remember the case of Stephen Schwartz, an attorney who submitted ChatGPT case hallucinations in documentation to a judge? Could you imagine if your doctor relied on studies imagined by AI? Or if an architect or engineer relied on materials information where Claude did its sums wrong? Or even a chef who relied on Bard's understanding of certain food allergens? It's easy to imagine these first-party generative AI experiences going wrong based on our existing knowledge of using these systems. But the big question is what happens when the information is second-hand? What happens when the doctor cites that imagined study in their own research? Or the engineer uses those calculations to apply their stamp to your architect's work? Or a chef publishes his recipe in a new cookbook? What if you just paid a lot of money for whatever service has been produced, and you did so solely based on the supposed expertise of the provider, not on their ability to write ChatGPT prompts? Outside of this context, we often talk about the supply chain of software, and the concern that we have that some open source package maintained by one person could be the root of much of the enterprise class software we rely on, and we have our bill of materials to let us know that this might be the case in many cases. But what about the supply chain of knowledge? And how can we possibly track what information we're consuming has been generated by AI rather than a human? Understanding where content originated is not a new problem. And depending on what type of content you're talking about, we currently have lots of different approaches. Want to ensure a document comes from a specific person? Well, we have notaries that check your identity when signing papers, or we have digital signatures that use cryptographic keys to allow anyone to check that the correct private key was used to sign a document using a public key that anyone can access. How about where something was printed? Did you know that many printers actually fingerprint your printed paper with tiny, almost invisible to the human eye markings that can track your prints back to their origin? This feature had been included by printer manufacturers for nearly 20 years before it was revealed in the early 2000s. There are also techniques that various image-based software use to embed in images details of what produced them that go far beyond basic metadata, and these are mainly used for managing the ownership of produced assets. But the fact is that generative AI presents a rather different challenge. The issue is not who owns the content, although this could also be an important consideration, but what aspects of the content have been generated using original human thought versus being constructed by artificial intelligence. For a Word document, for example, we already have the concept of metadata. Data about the data that can, for example, embed, although not indelibly, the name of the author. But what if the authorship is shared, with some having been human generated and some having been AI generated? You just copy and paste from ChatGPT and it all looks the same. The article from Wired that I referenced earlier highlighted an interesting idea. Giving AI tools their own Unicode character set that is functionally the same as existing characters, but because they are different in Unicode, can always be tied back to having been generated by AI. So what is Unicode? It's a standard for making sure that text gets represented consistently across computing platforms. When you type a capital A versus a lowercase a, what you are really selecting is two different characters that are referenced in Unicode as character 41 or 61. But there are already Unicode characters that look the same, and often these are used with negative intent by bad actors. For example, the Latin letter A, or Unicode character 61 as we just learned, visually looks the same as the Cyrillic letter A, but this is Unicode 430. These are referred to as homoglyphs, so while a word, phrase, or importantly a web link containing one or other of these characters might visually look the same to you, to your PC or phone, they are different. So if you get an email giving you a web link to mybank.com and you click on it thinking the A was character 61 when it was actually character 430, you might be starting off a very bad day. So how is this relevant to knowing where AI is used? Well, potentially we could create a block of characters in Unicode that are homoglyphs of those already in use, but are only generated by AI tools. So whether you are including single letters, words, or entire sections of a document created by AI in your work product, those differences would not interfere with humans' ability to read and comprehend the text, but would immediately be identifiable to your computer. It would also have the benefit of being harder to remove. If you have something like metadata attached to a Word document, you can remove it by simply placing your content in another document. But the benefit of a different Unicode character is while it may look the same to you, you can copy and paste it around as much as you like, and your PC will always know that it's actually a different character. The big problem here is while it might be harder to remove Unicode fingerprinting than other types of markings, it's still really not that hard. It's a fairly trivial process to script the transposing of Unicode from one character set to another based on a mapping table. Both Claude and ChatGPT can already create Python scripts to do this, and using Code Interpreter in ChatGPT, you could do the entire process, although in the example I gave it was far less sophisticated a way than would be required. Any technical solution has to have someone implement it, and is only as trustworthy as the chain of custody of that document or data. We can probably trust that companies like Google or Microsoft or OpenAI would adhere to any regulations related to the marking of AI-generated content, but we certainly couldn't trust everyone. With the availability of open source AI model resources, the barrier to entry for generative AI is lower than it has ever been, and the opportunities for players with less than the best intents to get involved are very high. Now, I'm not sure if this would be feasible at all, but one possible resolution to this weakness would be for AI-generated fingerprinting to be a hardware rather than a software task. We know that AI workloads rely on extremely powerful hardware like GPUs, and we know that the supply chain for this hardware is much more constrained and potentially controllable than that for software. Could it be possible that a company like Nvidia could embed code in their hardware that would make it impossible to develop AI software that doesn't fingerprint the outputs? Maybe. But even if a hardware solution to mark AI-generated content at source were possible, it would be impossible to regulate every tool that could remove those markings, as manipulating text is a very basic function of every programming language. Even if such restrictions were built into new languages or new versions of languages, which would probably be impossible, there are 50 plus years of history of tools with these sorts of capabilities that could be leveraged to get the job done. It's almost impossible to imagine that any future technological advance will allow for all AI content that's generated to be flagged, and for those flags to be permanent. The likelihood is that those companies that see value in compliance, like OpenAI or Microsoft or Google, will ensure that AI content coming from their services is properly flagged. But there will be other non-compliant services that anyone can use to create unmarked AI-generated product. We live in a world where you can buy cyber attacks as a software as a service offering, so it's simply impossible to imagine that tagging all AI content is a nut we're going to be able to crack. Should an AI tagging technology or technologies become recognised, then it's likely that services like Facebook could flag posts containing those markers, which could mitigate some concerns about AI being used to pass on misinformation. But it would be misinformation that was being shared by individuals, perhaps inadvertently, not by sophisticated threat actors or nation states who would be removing that AI tagging ahead of time anyway. Today we have to worry about the provenance of physical goods. Say you want to buy some designer sunglasses online. If you buy them through the website of a recognised department store, then you can be almost 100% sure that you're getting the real article. But as you move from brand name to no name, perhaps sourcing from Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, the likelihood of getting scammed increases. Putting up a fairly legitimate looking website isn't too hard. So this cannot be the sole marker of authenticity. Most of us now know this, but we have to remember that 20 to 25 years ago, no one had to think this way. As the internet has evolved, this authenticity metric has too. It is only in recent memory that we have had to have general awareness that the photos that we're seeing may not be real, and could be the product of Photoshop rather than a camera, or at least a combination of both. We haven't had the same concerns about video, but with deepfakes, we will have to learn about this in this new age of AI. Nonsense content on the internet, whether generated by AI or not, isn't a new problem. Ultimately, this is an issue of education, not one of technology. We perhaps have to be more suspicious, but maybe we're thinking about that wrong. There was perhaps a time in the mid to late 20th century, afterwards of the Second World War and before the mass adoption of social media, where what was right and wrong and what was fact and fiction and who was an authoritative source was a settled issue. But through much of human history, this was not the case. Travelling quack doctors of the 19th century, circuses and accompanying acts that would be grouped together in what would then be called freak shows. The populace was not well educated, information was not quick to arrive, and people could claim authority without knowledge. That sounds pretty much like the modern internet to me. And in this, AI just throws in another curveball. It doesn't completely change the rules of the game. Ultimately, you need to keep your eyes open and your wits about you, and trust the sources you choose to engage and work with. As a business owner, you might want to focus more on education at this time to ensure you enhance how you're training your team members to think about the steps they should take to verify anything they're relying upon information-wise. I think this is an interesting issue, but I don't think there's going to be one clear solution. No matter how initially attractive a concept like using Unicode might seem, it's probably not going to be the silver bullet that solves this problem. What do you think? Is this something you're concerned about, or is it just more of the same? Leave your comments below. Thanks for watching this video. I hope this has been useful to you. Until the next one, bye bye.